Determination are undeniable. Jackie Rowland, Al Jazeera, outside Ras Lanuf in eastern Libya.
Well, meanwhile, Colonel Gaddafi has sent government representatives around the world hoping to hold diplomatic talks. Libya's Deputy Defense Minister is in Cairo, where it's believed he'll meet Egypt's military council and the Arab League. Meanwhile, the question of whether there should be a no-fly zone is at the top of the agenda for the international community. NATO's defence ministers will discuss that situation in their regular meeting in Brussels on Thursday. While the bloc said on Wednesday it's not looking to intervene militarily, it is ready to respond if needed. Also in Belgium, the EU's foreign affairs representative will hold a working lunch to discuss the Libyan uprising. And France's President Nicolas Sarkozy is also due to meet envoys of Libya's rebel National Council in Paris in the coming hours. Now, in the US, President Barack Obama's approach to the situation is also being tested. As the violence escalates on the ground, he's coming under more pressure to decide whether Gaddafi's crackdown requires US intervention. Rosalind Jordan reports.
Barack Obama has never issued what one might call a doctrine for his foreign policy. But he did say this soon after becoming president.
Rules must be binding. Violations must be punished. Words must mean something.
In the case of Libya, with almost daily reports of government attacks on civilians, the president's words have become a test for his administration. Civilians and rebel fighters had been pleading with the U.S. for protection. And in 2005, the U.S. and other member states endorsed the United Nations Responsibility to Protect doctrine, which calls on these countries to intervene if they believe genocide is occurring, something that didn't happen for Rwanda or Kosovo. White House officials say they're already responding.
When the ethnic cleansing began in April of '92 in Bosnia, it took over a year for an asset freeze, over 2 years for a travel ban. Again, our actions were in under 2 weeks in this case.
One former State Department official under the Bush administration says Obama's own words may have boxed him in.
Here because he's gotten pretty far out ahead by saying that Gaddafi has to step down, that he's lost moral and legitimacy to govern. And so he's on the line to actually carry out what he has said.
But a former U.S. State Department official under the Obama administration told Al Jazeera the fighting in Libya isn't genocide per se. That said,
we are going to see evidence of extraordinary brutality. We're already seeing it in terms of just mowing down civilians, but I think this is not going to be something that a president is going to want to have on his conscience.
Also confusing observers, Obama's statement made during his speech in Cairo.
So let me be clear. No system of government can or should be imposed by one nation by any other.
And it's that statement that may be part of the reason why there's little support for a no-fly zone. But the statement is not enough to form a clear doctrine either. Instead, Obama has been dealing with popular uprisings in the Middle East on a nation-by-nation basis, and always with the intent, he says, of letting the citizens determine their fate. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, arrests have been made in Egypt after armed men clashed with protesters in Cairo's Tahrir Square. Pro-reform protesters say soldiers used violence to force hundreds of people to leave the center of mass protests, which helped to oust Hosni Mubarak. His supporters are accused of using knives, machetes and rocks and storming protesters who were camped out in that square. Meanwhile, the death toll from the fighting between Muslims and Christians in Cairo on Tuesday night has now risen to 13. Battles broke out when Muslims confronted the Christians who were out protesting the burning of a church last week. Egypt's Prosecutor General has launched an investigation. Yemen's embattled president is expected to meet representatives from across the political spectrum in a few hours' time. Ali Abdullah Saleh has faced repeated demands that he step down, and thousands demonstrated on Wednesday at a public square in the capital Sana'a, calling for the end of the regime. On Tuesday night, security forces had opened fire on a crowd of demonstrators outside Sana'a University. At least one man was killed. The Dalai Lama has announced he will be stepping down. The de facto political head of the exiled Tibetan movement has given no date for his retirement, but on his official website, he says it's time for what he calls a freely elected leader to take over. Let's join our correspondent, Melissa Chan, in Beijing. Melissa, is this a surprise?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question.
Is it a surprise that he's decided to resign from his political role?
It is not an incredible surprise. He's said this in the past. His administration in exile have said this in the past. It was just always a question of when it would actually take place. One thing that we have noticed in the past couple of years is that the Dalai Lama has cut back on his travel schedule. He is getting on in age, and there was concerns about his health earlier. So this could be part of the move to try to relieve him of more of his varied duties, frankly. But the thing to keep in mind is that he does remain the religious figurehead of the Tibetans, and to many Tibetans that is actually far more important to them. So again, I think we have to be very careful in understanding that he is not giving up an authority that would affect Tibetans from failing to follow him. He is the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, and even in China, where his image is blocked and censored and not allowed to be anywhere, the Tibetans carry his image with him in their cloaks, in their pockets, and so on.
For the Tibetans, his spiritual role is important, but for the Chinese, it's his political role that's been causing all the friction, and the conflict between the two sides. Is this likely to lead to any change in the way China sees Tibet?
Well, I said earlier that the religious and political roles are separate, but at the same time, the relationship between the Tibetans and the Chinese is one discussing the sort of disagreements they have on the religious role of the Dalai Lama. After all, one thing to point out is we have the National People's Congress going on in Beijing this week, and the Chinese choice of the Panchen Lama is a member of this Congress. So, you know, you have a religious figure doing political duties for the Chinese government. So in some ways, you really can't separate the two. What the Dalai Lama is apparently trying to do here is to separate the two, at least when it comes to the exile community and by extension the rest of the Tibetan community within China. He's trying to create this line, but from the Chinese point of view, actually, they just think of him as a threatening as a religious figure, threatening as a political figure. So even if he steps down from his roles in the political sphere, I think we will continue to see this relationship in terms of the Dalai Lama being the religious authority and the questions about Tibetans' alliances with the Dalai Lama and the consideration among the Tibetan community that the Panchen Lama that the Chinese have proposed is not the real Panchen Lama.
All right, Melissa Chan in Beijing. Thanks, Melissa. Now, Thursday sees the opening of what Myanmar is calling its biggest ever sale of precious gems. It's an opportunity for the government not only to make money, but to flaunt its massive ruby industry. What it will not be showing off, though, is the virtual slavery in the mining business, where workers as young as 4 are exploited to prop up production. Well, despite the strict controls on the presence of foreign journalists in Myanmar, AlJazeera has managed to get access to some of the country's mines in the Mogok region.
They are as young as 4 years old, cracking rock